Welcome, the Anointed Ones. When heaven gives you clearance, even hell's entire boardroom can't stop your mission. Let that sink in. Because what you're about to hear is not just a story, it's spiritual warfare history. You, chosen one, didn't just walk through the valley of the shadow of death. You set the whole valley on fire, alone. And here's the plot twist. While they were busy gathering spell books, blood offerings, and broomsticks, you were just minding your business, sipping tea, and unknowingly dismantling their entire network with divine authority. Fact: 80% of real spiritual warfare is unseen, and 100% of it terrifies those who try to manipulate it. They threw everything at you. Witchcraft, monitoring spirits, psychic attacks, even group rituals under the moonlight. And yet, here you are. Not just standing, but glowing. You didn't need an army, you were the army. One soul backed by the throne room. That's not just intimidating, that's career-ending for anyone trying to dabble in the dark against you. And now, they're shaking in their crystals. Some of them even tried switching paths. One minute they're conjuring spirits, next minute they're quoting Bible verses on Instagram like God knows my heart. Yeah, because their coven failed spectacularly. So buckle up, because in this video, we're exposing exactly why they're terrified, how you dismantled them without lifting a finger, and what happens next for the chosen ones who carry this kind of spiritual rank. This isn't superstition. It's sacred warfare. And you already won. Let's get into it. Number 1. You crushed a coven without ever casting a spell. They needed rituals, altars, chants, full moons, herbs, candles, and backup from the spirit world just to try and shake your atmosphere. And even then it wasn't enough. They were hoping you'd crack, lose your mind, spiral into confusion, or collapse under pressure. But you didn't. You showed up every day, battling hell with nothing but your breath, your scars, and a fire inside you that couldn't be explained. While they were trying to manipulate energy and manufacture outcomes through force, you were simply walking in alignment. And that alignment did more damage than any ritual they could conjure. That's what they didn't expect. They thought you'd fight them on their level, throw counterspells, or retaliate with your own spiritual artillery. But you didn't. You stood still, and in doing so, the storm broke around you. Not because you were weak, but because your presence is built different. You didn't play their game because your very existence changed the rules. That's the part that messed them up the most. You weren't trying to destroy them, you were just living, loving, healing, rising. And somehow that alone was powerful enough to collapse their work. They used every spiritual weapon they knew, and you, just by existing, became their undoing. That's what makes you dangerous to darkness. You don't need candles or chants. You don't need revenge or curses. You don't even need to prove anything. You just needed to survive. And you did that too well. They needed performance. You carried presence. And presence, real divine presence, is not something they can counterfeit. They tried to simulate power through rituals, but they forgot one thing. Authority can't be mimicked. It's either given or it's not. And you were given a measure of authority that their whole team couldn't decode. That's why they're scared. Because now they know. They can't touch you. Not because you're invincible in the physical, but because spiritually, you are untouchable. Their spells dissolved. Their demons fled. Their plans unraveled. And all the while you were probably just trying to find peace, rest, and some clarity about your own life, not realizing that every breath you took was destroying their foundation. That's the kind of power they can't prepare for. And they'll never understand it. Because it wasn't taught in their world. It was born in yours. Number 2, they waged war with numbers, you countered with rank. They came for you in numbers. A full gang. A group of people who thought strength came from being many. They believed that if they could gather enough voices, enough opinions, enough spells, they could overpower your spirit. What they didn't realize is that heaven doesn't work on popularity, it works on position. And your position was ranked higher than anything they could summon. You weren't just some random soul walking through life. You had divine clearance. Spiritual authority that can't be earned in a group chat, passed through initiations, or chanted into being. You didn't need 10 people backing you. You had one command from heaven, and that was enough. While they were building unity through manipulation and secrecy, you were forged through pain, silence, and obedience. You didn't gather people, you were sent. They underestimated what rank actually means in the spiritual realm. They assumed your quietness meant weakness. They thought being alone made you vulnerable. They thought because no one came to rescue you, you had no support. But what they couldn't see was what surrounded you in the unseen. While they relied on each other to amplify their energy, you were plugged into the source itself. You weren't echoing anything, you were moving with original instruction. That's what threw them off. They attacked someone who didn't respond the way most people would. You didn't beg, retaliate, curse, or fold. You stood your ground like someone who knew what realm they belonged to. And it made them nervous. Because they realized no matter how many came against you, your protection wasn't in numbers. It was in rank. They tried to isolate you, to weaken you, but the isolation only reminded heaven of who you are. It sharpened your discernment. It intensified your clarity. While they were scheming, you were being refined, and by the time they launched their biggest hit, you were already too high up for it to land. Their group effort failed, not because it wasn't organized, but because you weren't on their level anymore. They can't win against someone who's ranked by divine order, because when heaven gives you the green light, no amount of earthly noise or demonic coordination can override that. You didn't need people, you had position, and that alone made their whole operation collapse. Number 3, you ended their spells without lifting a finger, because you outlived them. They weren't trying to take you out in one blow. That would have been too obvious, too easy to trace. No, they were hoping to destroy you slowly, quietly, over time. They wanted to erode your confidence, wear down your mental strength, and make your spirit collapse under the weight of repeated attacks. They didn't send one big storm. They sent 1,000 little ones, financial stress, sudden betrayals, emotional breakdowns, silent battles in the night that no one saw but God, and through all of that, they expected you to fade. But instead of fading, you outlived every tactic. That's what messed them up. Because you weren't supposed to last this long. You weren't supposed to still be standing. You weren't supposed to have your mind intact. You weren't supposed to be waking up with fire in your eyes. You were supposed to be broken beyond repair. But every year, every setback, every spiritual hit just added another layer to your resilience. They weren't prepared for that. They thought spiritual warfare was a sprint, but you were trained to endure marathons they couldn't even finish. They invested time and energy trying to break your rhythm. They wanted to interrupt your destiny by exhausting your soul, and yet, your endurance turned out to be your weapon. You didn't need to fight with spells or words. You fought by surviving. You fought by still showing up. You fought by refusing to collapse, even when no one was clapping for you. You were still breathing, still healing, still growing, and that alone was warfare. They were waiting for you to self-destruct. But what actually happened is you outlasted the fire. You endured the loss, the confusion, the loneliness, and the spiritual chaos. And somehow, your heart didn't turn dark. That's what defeated them. Because if the storm didn't make you bitter, then the storm failed completely. They didn't know you were built to last. They underestimated your capacity to heal. They forgot that some chosen ones aren't destroyed by pain. They're activated by it. You didn't just survive their tactics, you rendered them useless. And the more they tried, the stronger your spirit became. That kind of strength can't be taught. It's born through fire, and you came out of it untouchable. Number 4, you were the mirror that made their magic backfire. They thought they were attacking you. In reality, they were attacking themselves through you. Every time they sent darkness your way, it didn't stick. It bounced. Not because you had some fancy protection ritual, but because your spirit was too aligned to absorb what came from the pit. Your energy was clean. Your motives were pure. And that purity acted like a mirror. Whatever they sent, malice, envy, confusion, curses, got reflected right back into their own lives, amplified. They didn't expect that. They assumed you'd absorb the hit, get sick, lose direction, fall into depression, or act out. Instead, their rituals disrupted their peace. Their spells cracked their homes. Some of them started experiencing the very torment they tried to send your way. Night terrors, sudden health issues, financial breakdowns, even internal chaos within their covens. Not because you fought back, but because they violated divine law by touching someone who walks in obedience. You were the wrong target, and the consequences were immediate. You weren't fighting them. You were too busy evolving. You weren't plotting revenge. You were too focused on healing. And still their magic broke down in your presence like a house built on sand. Because spiritual alignment is not just protection, it's a form of judgment. And you carried that judgment without even speaking a word. That's what made you dangerous to them. You didn't just nullify their energy, you exposed it. Your life became a light that revealed the filth they were trying to keep hidden. Your joy after the attack humiliated them. Your peace after the chaos embarrassed them. Your success after their sabotage left them speechless. Not because you were trying to prove anything, but because the truth of who you are automatically convicted the lie of what they were doing. And here's the real fear. If their magic backfired this hard on you, who else might reflect it too? You were the experiment that ended the illusion. You showed them that there are still some people walking this earth who can't be touched, manipulated, or spiritually detained. And now they don't just fear your strength, they fear your reflection. Because anything they send your way will show them exactly what lives inside them. And that's a horror they can't unsee. Number 5. You beat them with access they'll never have. They tried to access realms through force, manipulation, and trickery. You didn't have to force anything. You were invited. They conjured spirits to serve them. You were commissioned by the Spirit who commands all things. That's the part they can't stand. You weren't performing for power. You were chosen for it. While they were drawing circles, chanting incantations, and sacrificing for temporary results, you were quiet, still, listening, and heaven was downloading blueprints into your soul. Their access was limited to shadows. Yours came straight from the throne. They relied on knowledge passed down in secrecy, stolen power traded through rituals. But you received what they can't buy or barter, divine trust. You became a vault of holy intelligence. You were granted access not because you begged for it, but because you were built to carry it. And now that they see what you walk in, fear has settled deep into their bones. They tapped into realms where fear is currency. You were trained in a kingdom where love is law. That's why your moves carry weight. That's why your words shake atmospheres. You don't operate from reaction, you operate from revelation. They spent years learning how to manipulate energy, but you became a walking conduit of presence. Your every step reveals a higher order, and it short-circuits everything they try to construct. They're terrified because you move in a power they can't replicate. Their entire operation is built on pretending to be what you were born to embody. They fake light. You are light. They mimic peace. You carry peace that confronts chaos. That's not just intimidating, it's humiliating. Because no matter how many books they read, spirits they summon, or initiations they go through, they will never be able to access the dimension of favor you stand in so effortlessly. And what cuts deepest is this. They saw the price you paid for that access, and they still couldn't copy it. Because it required surrender, sacrifice, obedience, and purity, things their pride won't allow. You walk in a realm that's off limits to anyone who chooses ego over humility. That's why they tried to destroy you. But the very access they envied became your shield. And now they're stuck outside a gate that will never open for them. Number 6. You were their assignment. But they became the warning. They marked you as a target, thinking you were weak, isolated, and easy to break. They picked you out like a wounded animal, assuming you wouldn't survive the level of spiritual warfare they had planned. You were underestimated because you weren't loud, flashy, or connected to their circles. In their eyes, you looked like prey. But what they didn't realize was that you were carrying an anointing that responds after the attack, not before. You weren't weak, you were watched. And every move they made against you was recorded by a kingdom they couldn't see. You weren't just their assignment, you were a setup, and they walked right into it. While they thought they were orchestrating your downfall, they were actually signing themselves up for exposure. Because everything they tried on you backfired, publicly, spiritually, generationally. And now your name echoes like a warning through the ranks of anyone else foolish enough to come for you. You became the evidence that chosen ones are not to be tampered with, not because you're perfect, but because you're protected by protocol. The same people who plotted to destroy you are now the reason others are backing off. You didn't just endure the attacks, you survived them in a way that marked you with divine legitimacy. Now they speak your name in hushed tones, because the consequence that followed your endurance is still echoing. Some of them lost things they can't get back. Others spiraled in ways they never saw coming. Not because you fought them, but because you didn't have to. They violated something sacred when they came for you, and the universe responded accordingly. You became the lesson that others are quietly studying. People who once joined in on mocking or undermining you are now reevaluating their actions. They watched you rise from every pit they dug. They saw doors open for you that they tried to slam shut. They witnessed favor fall on your life while their own blessings dried up, and it shook them, because you weren't supposed to make it. But you did, and now no one can unsee the fact that you were chosen. You are no longer just a survivor. You're a statement, a living example of what happens when people try to sabotage someone who has divine backing. You were their assignment, but God made you their aftermath. Number 7. Their numbers made them weak. Your isolation made you deadly. Thought their strength was in their numbers. Dozens of them gathered in secret, repeating chants, casting spells, and hyping each other up, convinced that unity in darkness would overpower a single light. But you didn't need a crowd. You didn't need chants or confirmation. You had silence, fire, and the kind of loneliness that turns a person into a weapon. What they mistook as your weakness, being alone, was actually the furnace that refined you. You weren't just sitting quietly in isolation. You were being sharpened. Every night you cried out, every time you felt misunderstood, every moment you were abandoned or betrayed, something was happening beneath the surface. You were being stripped of attachments, distractions, and illusions. You learned how to walk with God alone. You learned how to war in the spirit without applause. You learned how to hear clearly without outside voices interfering. That level of solitude isn't weakness, it's deadly. They were organized, but you were disciplined. They had numbers, but you had precision. Their strength came from each other's energy. Yours came from the throne. And that's why they couldn't touch you. Because while they were building unity based on control and manipulation, you were being trained by fire. And fire doesn't ask for permission. It consumes. They moved like a pack, hoping that group power could crush your soul. But your soul was already reinforced by the battles they didn't see. The nights you couldn't sleep. The days you felt like giving up. The moments you had nothing left but still stood anyway. That's what made you different. That's what made you dangerous. They had to gather because none of them were strong enough alone. You, on the other hand, became unstoppable because you had no one. And in that space where no one came to help, no one showed up to cheer, no one understood, you met power that most people never access. You didn't just survive isolation, you mastered it. You turned it into a weapon they can't counter. That's why you terrify them. Because you weren't created by hype, trends, or collective energy. You were formed in darkness, trained in silence, and anointed through pain. You don't need a following to be effective. You just need one order from heaven, and when that order drops, not even their combined efforts can stand in your way. Number 8. They couldn't read you because you came from a realm they can't enter. They tried everything, sent spirits to watch you, tried to scan your energy, used rituals to spy, to predict, to map out your future. But no matter what they did, they kept coming up short. Confused, blocked, frustrated. You were unreadable. They couldn't track your movements, decode your thoughts, or tap into your plans, and it drove them mad. Because they're used to reading people like open books. But you showed up like a locked vault they had no key for. Their tools failed because your life isn't written in the frequencies they tap into. You weren't built from trauma-based templates, fear, or ego. You were constructed from purpose, obedience, and divine code. Their spells and rituals are effective against souls operating in lower dimensions, but you came from a higher realm entirely, one where their access is forbidden. So when they tried to tune into your frequency, all they got was static. They didn't just fail to read you, they hit resistance they didn't expect. Their familiar spirits couldn't get through, their dreams were disrupted, Their visions became distorted. They couldn't tell if you were coming or going, rising or falling, and that's what shook them, because they usually predict everything. But when it came to you, they were flying blind. That's because mystery is not something that can be conjured or manipulated. It's not hiding, it's encoded. And your spirit is encoded with things only heaven understands. You were sealed by a divine encryption that makes anything unclean bounce off before it gets close. You walk with spiritual firewalls that block their tracking attempts. Every time they tried to read you, they were met with confusion, migraines, false visions, or silence. That wasn't an accident. That was spiritual protection in action. They're used to accessing people through open wounds, emotional chaos, or secret sin, but your healing, your clarity, and your alignment closed all those doors. You didn't just become invisible, you became untouchable. And when someone can't be read, they can't be controlled. That's why they're scared now, because you move with a level of unpredictability that makes their whole system collapse. You don't operate in patterns, they operate in patterns. And patterns can't trap what was born from pure mystery. That's why they gave up trying to read you. Because every time they tried, the only thing they saw was their own limits. Number 9, their greatest fear was that you'd realize who you are. The real battle was never just about curses or spells, it was about identity. Their greatest weapon wasn't witchcraft, it was manipulation, gaslighting, psychological warfare. They wanted you to doubt yourself so deeply that you'd never tap into your true power. They knew from the beginning who you were. That's why they targeted you early, often, and ruthlessly. They studied you, tried to isolate you, distort your reflection, and program you to think you were ordinary, broken, or lost. Because if you never remembered who you were, you'd never access what they feared most, your assignment. They couldn't stop your calling, so they tried to convince you you didn't have one. They planted voices, environments, and relationships around you to echo the same lie. You're nothing special. But deep down, something in you always knew that wasn't true. You didn't have proof. You had knowing. And that knowing is what they tried to kill. Every attack wasn't just to harm you, it was designed to disconnect you from your mind, from your source, from your voice. Because if you ever stood up and truly saw yourself through God's lens, they knew everything they built would fall apart. That's not paranoia, that's spiritual mechanics. Because when a chosen one wakes up fully, the ripple effect is devastating. Every demon assigned to delay your purpose starts losing ground. Every structure built on your silence begins to collapse. They fear that moment when your memory reconnects with your authority. That moment you stop asking for permission and start walking in position. Because at that point they can't lie to you anymore. They can't control you. They can't twist your reality. You become spiritually nuclear, not because you're loud, but because you're aware. And that kind of awareness changes everything. They invested years trying to keep you from reaching that level of clarity. But the moment it clicked, the moment you remembered, you became unshakable. Not perfect, but anchored. And from that point on, you were no longer reacting to their tactics. You were operating from your seat, a place of divine rulership, not fear. They know now it's too late. The veil has lifted. You know who you are. And that truth alone has already done more damage to their kingdom than any prayer or ritual ever could. Number 10. They watched you walk through fire, and then rise from the ashes with no burn marks. They didn't just want to hurt you. They wanted to incinerate every part of you. With precision and patience, they built fires meant to consume your spirit. They created situations so painful, so chaotic, so suffocating, they thought there was no way you'd come out of it whole. They didn't send random storms, they crafted controlled infernos, relationship betrayal that cut deep, financial sabotage designed to break your will, isolation that felt like death. They studied your weaknesses and attacked you at your core, but you survived what was supposed to bury you. Not just survived, you rose with no bitterness, no disfigurement, not even a trace of the hell they put you through. That's what has them shaken. Because they watched you walk through fires that should have left permanent scars, mental collapse, emotional paralysis, and instead you came out stronger, wiser, lighter. They were waiting for you to unravel. Instead you evolved. You're walking around with peace, clarity, joy, and purpose, and they know what you've been through. They know the pressure they applied. They know the traps they set. They know the curses they whispered in the dark. And yet they're forced to watch you glow in ways they can't understand. No smoke on your name. No stain on your spirit. No trace of destruction, just a version of you they can't touch anymore. The fire didn't burn you, it refined you. And that's what haunts them. Because now they realize, if all of that didn't break you, nothing will. They threw everything at you. Spells, slander, slights. They tried to ruin your reputation, your mind, your soul. And now they're the ones trembling, not because of what you said, but because of what you became. You became evidence that divine favor isn't just about blessings, it's about endurance. You became the proof that hell has limits, that no matter how hot it gets, it can't consume someone who's already been fire-tested by heaven. They're terrified now, because your survival exposed their weakness. You're not who you were before the fire. You're untouchable. And they know if that didn't end you, they never stood a chance to begin with. Number 11. Their witchcraft was powerful, but your obedience was lethal. They spent years perfecting their craft, decades learning how to manipulate energy, twist reality, and bend people's will through dark practices. They were trained, disciplined, and intentional about every spell they cast, every ritual they performed. And still, all of that collapsed under one thing: your obedience. Not your noise, not your defense, just your quiet, consistent surrender to divine instruction. They can't understand how someone like you, who never engaged in their rituals or used their tools, became a threat to their entire operation. But here's the truth. They operate through force, and you operate through alignment. That's a higher frequency. Every time you said yes to God, even when it made no sense, you activated levels of power they could never reach. Your obedience shook realms they thought they had locked down. You weren't trying to fight them. You were just following the Spirit. You were healing when told to heal, walking away when told to leave, remaining silent when you wanted to speak, speaking up when it cost you everything. And those small, obedient acts released divine judgments and breakthroughs that destroyed their spiritual structures without you even knowing it. That's what terrifies them. Not your strength, your submission, because obedience is lethal to darkness. It bypasses human understanding and directly aligns you with divine timing and authority. You weren't out here throwing curses or countering spells. You were fasting when led, forgiving when it hurt, praying when no one saw. You were walking by faith, not performance, and every time you moved in obedience, something they built fell apart. They crafted their moves with precision, but you carried something they couldn't replicate: divine instruction in real time. That's what no spell book can touch. You don't need to know what they're doing, you just need to know what God is saying. And that's enough to wreck their plans completely, because obedience doesn't just protect, it releases judgment. That's why they fear your next move, because you don't announce it. You don't strategize like they do, you listen. And when you listen, heaven responds, earth shifts, doors open, chains break. And whatever darkness had its grip starts to tremble. Your yes carries weight they can't measure, and now they know they were never fighting you, they were fighting your alignment. And that battle, they can never win. Number 12. You didn't just survive. You disarmed generational strongholds. This was never just about you. You were the target. But the real mission was deeper, ancestral. They weren't attacking your present alone. They were trying to maintain a curse that's been sitting on your bloodline for generations. Cycles of poverty, trauma, addiction, rejection, confusion, and sabotage that took root long before you were born. You inherited battles that weren't yours, but somehow you were the one chosen to end them. They thought you would fold under the pressure like the ones before you. They counted on you repeating the patterns, giving in to bitterness, addiction, fear, silence, or shame. But you didn't. You questioned the lies. You sat with the pain. You faced what your ancestors didn't have the tools or support to confront, and that simple act, facing it, broke chains in the spirit that had been left untouched for decades. You didn't just survive attacks. You dismantled systems. With every prayer, every tear, every refusal to go back to what was comfortable, you were breaking contracts made in the dark long ago. You became the interruption to every generational curse that assumed no one would stand up. Your resilience wasn't just strength. It was surgical. It disarmed powers that relied on your silence, on your confusion, on your exhaustion. And now, those powers are scrambling because the strongholds are collapsing and you're not stopping. They're scared because they now realize you're not just trying to heal, you're rebuilding, reconstructing an entire legacy from the ground up. You're walking into new territory for your family line, creating paths of clarity, spiritual intelligence, prosperity, peace, and identity that were never accessible before. You're changing the blueprint. And no dark system can reverse that without a cost too great to pay. Number 13, you were the living firewall that burned their blueprints. You didn't need a title or a platform to do it, you just needed resolve. You became a spiritual wrecking ball, crashing through years of bondage with nothing but conviction, obedience, and relentless faith. And the darkness that once laughed at your ancestors is now trembling because it sees you're not backing down. You carry the kind of authority that makes spirits flee. You don't just end battles, you start revolutions. And they know if you're allowed to keep building, the system they worked hard to maintain is finished. That's why they're afraid. Not because of who you were, but because of who you refused to become. They were strategic, calculated. They didn't move impulsively. They planned every attack with precision. Days were chosen, moons were timed, rituals were synced to exact spiritual windows. They studied your habits, your weaknesses, your patterns. They thought they had you mapped out like a predictable route on a GPS. But no matter how detailed their blueprint was, nothing ever landed the way they intended. The energy never hit. The damage never stuck. The outcomes always backfired, and now they're left confused, frustrated, and afraid because they followed every spiritual rule they believed in, and you still didn't fall. What they didn't account for was your firewall, a divine resistance system built into your very soul, not man-made, not ritual-based, but established by heaven through every tear you cried, every heartbreak you endured, every time you chose growth instead of retaliation. You were wired with a level of spiritual security that doesn't just protect, it disarms. Their magic didn't just miss, it jammed, glitched, collapsed under its own weight. Because you don't just repel darkness, you corrupt its code. You weren't even aware half the time. While they were up at midnight sending attacks, you were just trying to get through life, healing, praying, breathing. Yet still your spiritual system picked up on every threat before it arrived, blocked it, reversed it, silenced it. That's not luck, that's design. You've been through enough pain to become spiritually encrypted. Your discernment isn't paranoia, it's precision. You sense moves in the dark before they even form fully. That's why they keep failing. Because your spirit catches what their rituals never expected you to see. They thought you were a target, but you were actually a trap. Every attack they launched toward you became a trigger for their own unraveling. Not because you cursed them back, but because they broke divine law when they touched what was covered. You didn't fight back in the natural. You didn't need to. Your firewall is spiritual, and it burns through blueprints before they ever reach your doorstep. Now, they don't even know how to approach you. Every strategy they build keeps crumbling in their hands. Every attack they try to organize falls apart mid-launch. You're unreadable, unshakable, and now untouchable. Because divine firewalls don't just protect, they prosecute. And they're finally learning the cost of messing with someone who is built in the fire and protected by it. Number 14. They know what you're capable of now, and they're scrambling to retreat. They thought they were dealing with flesh and blood, a person they could isolate, target, and dismantle with spells, manipulation, and surveillance. But what they ran into wasn't just a human. It was a spiritual event. You weren't sent to play defense. You were sent to end something. And now their entire infrastructure, built over years through secrecy, rituals, and fear, is unraveling because of you. They didn't expect your breakthrough to be so devastating. They assumed if you escaped, you'd crawl out broken, bruised, barely functional. But you didn't crawl. You walked out on fire with clarity, authority, and divine evidence. And that's what shook them to the core. Because it meant every spell they cast, every word curse they spoke, every demonic alliance they formed, none of it worked. You became the undeniable proof that when heaven backs someone, no force in hell can override it. Now their coven is splintered. They're pointing fingers at each other. They're paranoid that one of their own is secretly turning against them. The energy they use to direct toward you is now boomeranging inside their own circle. Suspicion, division, nightmares, accidents. Their own lives are echoing with the backlash of touching divine territory. And they can't stop it, because it was never yours to carry in the first place. It was theirs. And now the bill is due. You were never just another spiritual target. You were the collapse written in prophecy. You showed up as a person, but operated like a storm. You walked in with pain, but left with power, and the cost of trying to destroy you is now being paid in full across every level of their system. Their control is gone, their cover is blown, their confidence is shattered. Now they're retreating, fast. They're trying to undo what they did, trying to pull back what was released, but it's too late. You already won. You already scattered their camp. You already exposed the weak links. And they now realize messing with a chosen one was the beginning of their end. They don't fear your revenge. They fear your existence, because it's proof that divine order always overturns dark agendas. And now, every step you take reminds them they picked the wrong one. They thought you were just a person they could control, break, or silence. But what you truly were shook them to their core. You were divine interruption, a cosmic reset cloaked in human skin. You weren't sent to survive their witchcraft. You were sent to shatter their foundation. And you did exactly that. Quietly, powerfully, irrevocably. They see it now, the chaos in their coven, the fractures in their ranks, the fear in their eyes. They know what's happening, and they know it's because of you. You weren't just their target, you became their consequence. Their darkness triggered your ascension, and now your rise is a judgment they can't escape. It's not just that you didn't die, it's that you came back stronger, more spiritually lethal, and untouchable. Your victory didn't end at survival. It ended their illusions of control. It dismantled their hierarchy. It forced them to see the limits of their power and the reach of yours. You didn't throw a single spell, yet your obedience detonated everything they built. That's divine power. That's holy rank. That's why they tremble now. So stand tall, chosen one. The damage is done. To them, not you. You didn't just defend yourself, you exposed them. You didn't retaliate, you radiated. You didn't fight their way, you walked God's way. And that was more than enough. Your story is now the sermon. Your survival is now the sword. And your very presence is a threat to every dark system still hiding in shadows. If this message spoke to your spirit and confirmed what you already knew deep down, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a divine download like this again. Like this video if you know you were the weapon heaven formed and not the victim hell expected. Drop a comment below and declare, I didn't just survive, I dismantled the darkness. Let the world and the realm of spirits know you're awake. And don't forget to share this with another chosen one who's been silently battling, wondering if they were crazy or divinely called. This is more than content, it's a confirmation. Let's flood the algorithm with truth. Let's make heaven's warriors visible again. The battle was brutal, but your breakthrough was louder. Let's keep walking in power, together. God bless you.